Confrontation gives them something to work with. Emotion gives them traction. Anger, fear, defensiveness, urgency, these are not obstacles to manipulation. They are entry points. Manipulators are not threatened by intensity. They are threatened by absence. The moment you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop feeding the interaction with emotional data, their strategy begins to collapse. Manipulation depends on feedback. Every manipulative tactic is an experiment, a probe, a test. The manipulator applies pressure and watches what moves. They look for changes in tone, posture, speed of speech, justification, reassurance, over-explaining. Each reaction teaches them how to push next. This is why manipulative people often seem intuitive. They are not reading minds. They are reading responses. Silence removes the data they need to operate. When you respond emotionally, you are broadcasting information. You reveal what matters to you. You reveal where you feel threatened. You reveal what you're afraid to lose. Manipulators don't need truth. They need signals. Silence strips those signals away. With no emotional output to analyze, their predictive model fails. This is the moment control destabilizes. Without feedback, the manipulator cannot tell if their tactic is working, failing, or even being noticed. Uncertainty replaces confidence, and uncertainty is poison to manipulation. The entire strategy depends on knowing how much pressure to apply. Silence removes that calibration. This is why silence is not weakness. Weakness is emotional leakage. Weakness is compulsion to respond. Weakness is explaining yourself to regain comfort. Silence, when it is grounded, communicates the opposite. It says, "You do not have access to my internal state." That message is not verbal. It is felt, and manipulators feel it immediately. Silence destabilizes control attempts because it reverses effort. Instead of you working to manage the interaction, the manipulator begins working to regain footing. They talk more. They escalate. They switch tactics. Guilt turns into urgency. Flattery turns into accusation. Calm pressure turns into emotional noise. These shifts are not random. They are signs of lost control. Silence forces manipulators into self-exposure. The more you remain still, the more they move. And movement reveals intent. When someone is denied emotional access, they reveal how badly they need it. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects their strategy back at them. You see the manipulation clearly because you are no longer inside it. This is the difference between silence and passivity. Passivity disengages. It collapses inward. Silence, as a psychological stance, stays present without reacting. You are listening. You are aware. You are simply not giving emotional permission. This form of silence is active containment. It holds the line without drama, and drama is what manipulators need. Drama creates urgency. Urgency compresses time. Compressed time weakens judgment. Silence does the opposite. It expands space. It slows the interaction. It restores choice. The manipulator feels this loss of momentum immediately, and fear enters the equation. Not for the fear of you. Fear of unpredictability. Manipulators rely on patterns. They need you to behave like everyone else. When you don't, you step outside their playbook. Silence breaks the script, and people who operate by scripts panic when the script stops working. This is where your identity activation begins. You are shifting from emotionally responsive to emotionally opaque. This does not mean becoming cold, cruel, or distant. It means becoming unreadable. It means your internal state is no longer public property. You choose when to speak, what to reveal, and what to withhold. Opacity is protection. When your emotions are not visible, manipulators lose leverage. When your reactions are not automatic, their timing fails. When your silence is calm rather than tense, their tactics feel obvious instead of persuasive. This is why silence terrifies manipulative people. It exposes them. It slows them down. It removes their advantage. And most importantly, it forces them to confront a truth they avoid at all costs. Control only works where access is granted. Silence revokes access without explanation. You do not need to accuse. You do not need to defend. You do not need to confront. You simply stop feeding the system that was feeding on you. This is the psychological law you now carry. Manipulation requires emotional feedback to function. Remove the feedback, and the manipulation starves. Before we go deeper into why silence collapses manipulation, tap like and hit subscribe. Because what comes next reveals the truth manipulators hide from themselves. Control only works where emotional feedback is available. In the next part, you'll see exactly how silence breaks manipulative strategy step by step, and why most manipulators either retreat, escalate, or expose themselves the longer silence holds. For now, understand this. Silence is not the absence of power. It is the removal of permission. Manipulation is not magic. It is pattern recognition. Manipulators do not control people by force. They control them by prediction. They watch how you react, catalog your emotional responses, and build a behavioral map. Every sigh, justification, defensive tone, or rushed reply becomes data. Over time, they learn which buttons move you fastest, and which pressures make you fold. This is why manipulators often feel one step ahead. They aren't smarter. They are better at reading reactions. Silence destroys that advantage. When you stop reacting, the pattern collapses. The manipulator reaches for familiar tactics and gets nothing back. No anger, no reassurance, no urgency, no emotional confirmation. Their internal model, the one they rely on to steer you, stops updating. And when a predictive system stops receiving feedback, it fails. This is where discomfort begins. Manipulators need narrative control. They need to believe they understand what's happening and where it's going. Silence removes the narrative. Without a story to guide the interaction, they feel exposed, uncertain, slightly off balance. The same way you feel when your phone loses signal in an unfamiliar place. Uncertainty is intolerable to people who survive on control. So they compensate. Some escalate, some withdraw, some over-explain, some accuse. Each response is an attempt to restore predictability. Escalation is the most common move. The manipulator raises emotional intensity to force a reaction. Sharper words, time pressure, guilt, fear, or flattery, dialed up too quickly. This isn't strength, it's desperation. They are trying to provoke anything that tells them where they stand. Withdrawal is the second response. When pressure fails, they retreat to reassess. Silence feels dangerous because it denies them clarity. They step back to regain footing. This often looks like sudden coldness, distance, or feigned indifference. It's not loss of interest. It's recalibration. Both reactions reveal intent faster than any argument ever could. Arguments give manipulators structure. They know how to argue. They know how to reframe, deflect, and exhaust you emotionally. Silence removes structure. It forces them to operate without a script. And when scripts disappear, true motives surface. You begin to see what they actually want. Do they need reassurance? Do they need urgency? Do they need dominance? Do they need compliance? Silence answers these questions without you saying a word. This is why silence breaks manipulative strategy at the mechanical level. Manipulation requires three things: emotional access, predictable response, and narrative momentum. Silence removes all three at once. There is no access, because emotion is contained. There is no predictability, because reaction is withheld. There is no momentum, because time is no longer compressed. Time is the enemy of manipulation. Manipulators thrive on speed. Speed prevents reflection. Speed forces decisions before awareness catches up. Silence slows everything down. It stretches moments. It introduces space. And space restores choice. This is also why silence feels uncomfortable to you at first. Your nervous system has been trained to respond, to explain, to smooth things over, to resolve tension quickly. When you choose silence, your body protests. It wants relief. It wants resolution. It wants to regain comfort by speaking. That urge is not intuition. It is conditioning. Learning to tolerate that discomfort is the turning point. As you hold silence, something subtle happens. The manipulator begins revealing more than intended. Words spill. Accusations sharpen. Urgency becomes obvious. The mask slips, not because you attacked it, but because silence removed the need for you to participate in the illusion. This is the quiet reversal of power. You are no longer managing the interaction. They are. You are no longer explaining yourself. They are. You are no longer proving intent. They are exposing it. Silence does not dominate loudly. It dominates structurally. And once you understand this, you stop arguing with manipulators. You stop defending yourself. You stop trying to win debates that were never about truth. You let silence do what force never could. Reveal reality. This is the law that governs this shift. What cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. When your reactions become unpredictable, not erratic, but withheld, manipulation loses its footing. The strategy fails not because you fought it, but because you starved it. In the next part, you'll see how silence doesn't just break manipulation. It forces manipulators to reveal themselves completely, often without realizing it. For now, remember this. Silence is not something you use against manipulators. It is something you use to step out of their reach. Silence does something most people never realize until they experience it firsthand. It reverses psychological pressure. In a normal interaction, pressure flows toward the person who feels responsible for keeping the exchange moving. The one who explains, the one who reassures, the one who reacts. Manipulators exploit this instinct relentlessly. They create tension, then wait for you to relieve it. The moment you speak emotionally, justify yourself, or rush to resolve discomfort, the pressure transfers back onto you, and control follows it. Silence stops that transfer. When you remain silent, the pressure has nowhere to go. It turns inward. The manipulator is forced to carry the discomfort they created. This is not theoretical. It happens at the nervous system level. Humans are wired to seek resolution when tension is introduced. If you refuse to resolve it, the other person's system scrambles to do it for themselves. This is where self-revelation begins. Deprived of response, manipulators start filling the space. They talk more. Their tone shifts. Their intentions sharpen. What was once subtle becomes obvious. What was once masked becomes clumsy. Silence doesn't accuse them. It invites them to expose themselves. The first thing that appears is over-explanation. When control slips, manipulators often start justifying themselves unprompted. They explain motives you never questioned. They clarify intentions you never challenged. They repeat points unnecessarily. This is not transparency. It's anxiety. Over-explanation is the sound of someone trying to regain narrative dominance. when they no longer feel secure. Then comes accusation. If explanation doesn't work, projection often follows. You're suddenly cold, difficult, disrespectful, or confusing. Notice what's happening here. They are naming their discomfort and assigning it to you. Accusation is an attempt to provoke emotion, to force you back into reaction, so the old pattern can resume. If an accusation fails, urgency appears. Deadlines materialize out of nowhere. Decisions suddenly need to be made right now. Consequences are hinted at. Pressure is applied through time rather than logic. This is a last-ditch effort to bypass your silence by overwhelming your nervous system. Urgency is manipulation's emergency lever. Each of these behaviors is a confession. Not a verbal confession, a psychological one. They reveal what the manipulator needs from you: reassurance, compliance, dominance, emotional engagement. Silence turns the spotlight inward. Without resistance, they unravel themselves. If this is changing how you see pressure, tactics, and emotional access, tap like and hit subscribe. Your support matters because it helps this message reach people who are ready to stop feeding manipulation with reactions and start becoming unreadable. And this is why silence is not avoidable. Avoidance is fear-driven withdrawal. It leaks anxiety. It feels unstable. Silence, when done correctly, is grounded, present, attentive. You are not disappearing. You are simply refusing to supply emotional fuel. Your posture, eye contact, and stillness remain intact. There is no collapse, no retreat, just containment. Manipulators sense this difference immediately. They do not escalate against avoidance. They exploit it. They escalate against silence, because silence threatens their control. This distinction matters because many people mistake silence for weakness. It is the opposite. Weakness seeks escape. Silence holds ground without engaging in unnecessary battle. As silence stretches, something more subtle occurs. The manipulator begins negotiating with themselves. Their confidence fragments. Their tactics lose rhythm. They may contradict earlier statements. They may soften suddenly. They may attempt charm after aggression. This inconsistency is not random. It's diagnostic. You are watching someone search for leverage and fail to find it. This is the moment your identity shifts. You are no longer the reactive target. You become the calm observer. Observers are dangerous to manipulators because observers cannot be rushed. They do not confuse noise for meaning. They notice sequencing, tone changes, emotional spikes. They see patterns instead of words. Silence gives you this vantage point. From here, you realize something critical. Manipulation requires participation, not agreement. Participation. You don't have to say yes for manipulation to work. You only have to engage emotionally. Silence withdraws that engagement without confrontation. And because there is no visible conflict, manipulators often expose themselves further, trying harder than necessary. They show impatience. They show entitlement. They show insecurity. All the things they normally hide behind charm, logic, or pressure come to the surface. This is why silence feels threatening to them. It doesn't attack. It watches. The law governing this shift is simple and brutal. Greater than when control fails, intent surfaces. Silence removes control. Intent has nowhere to hide. And once you see intent clearly, you are no longer vulnerable to manipulation. You are choosing responses instead of being dragged into reactions. You don't need to call out behavior. You don't need to expose anything publicly. You simply adjust your distance, your access, your decisions, quietly. This is mastery. You stop asking, "How do I stop manipulators?" You start becoming someone they can't operate on. In the next part, you'll see how this silent observation doesn't just protect you. It permanently shifts hierarchy, making testing and manipulation stop altogether. For now, understand this. Silence doesn't make manipulators dangerous. It makes them visible. Silence does more than protect you from manipulation. It quietly reorganizes hierarchy. Manipulators do not target strength. They target movement. They scan for emotional responsiveness, for signs that someone can be pushed, rushed, guilted, or destabilized. This is why confident-sounding people still get manipulated while calm ones often do not. Manipulation is not about intelligence or status. It's about access. The moment someone believes they can move you emotionally, hierarchy tilts in their favor. Silence removes that access. When you stop reacting, explaining, or emotionally adjusting to another person's pressure, you send a signal that operates beneath language. You are communicating without words that your internal state is not negotiable. This immediately changes how you are categorized. You are no longer seen as someone to influence. You are seen as someone to adapt to. This is where dominance shifts without confrontation. Most people believe hierarchy is established through assertion, arguments, or displays of confidence. In reality, hierarchy is set by who regulates whom. If someone can provoke anxiety, urgency, or guilt in you, they occupy the higher position in the interaction. If they cannot, the hierarchy flips, often without either person consciously realizing it. Silence is the mechanism that causes this flip. When guilt stops working, manipulators pause. When urgency fails, they hesitate. When intimidation produces no reaction, they recalibrate. These moments of hesitation are not small, they are neurological. The manipulator's nervous system is used to feedback. When feedback disappears, uncertainty replaces control, and uncertainty is intolerable to people who rely on dominance through emotional pressure. This is why silence is not passive. Passive people withdraw and disappear. Silent people remain present. Their posture does not collapse. Their attention does not scatter. They listen without feeding. They observe without absorbing. This distinction matters because manipulators can exploit passivity, but they cannot penetrate grounded restraint. Silence, used correctly, becomes an emotional boundary. Boundaries are often misunderstood as statements. Don't talk to me that way. That's not acceptable. Stop. While these have their place, verbal boundaries still invite negotiation. Silence does not. Silence does not argue. It does not justify. It does not escalate. It simply withholds emotional permission. And without permission, pressure dies. This is why guilt collapses first. Guilt relies on your internal participation. It requires you to feel responsible for someone else's emotional state. Silence refuses that role. You are not rejecting them. You are not rescuing them. You are simply not entering their emotional field. The manipulator feels this as abandonment of control, not cruelty. Urgency collapses next. False deadlines depend on panic. Silence stretches time. When you do not rush, the artificial nature of the pressure becomes obvious. Manipulators sense this immediately. They either soften their demand or reveal it was never real to begin with. Intimidation is the final lever, and the weakest. Intimidation depends on fear responses. Raised voices, threats, dominance displays. All of these are attempts to shock the nervous system into submission. Silence neutralizes them by refusing escalation. No counter-threat, no defensive posture, just stillness. This forces the aggressor to confront their own behavior without resistance to hide behind. At this point, hierarchy locks in. Not because you won, not because you asserted dominance, but because emotional access was denied consistently. Hierarchy stabilizes where patterns stabilize. When someone repeatedly fails to move you, their brain updates its internal model of you. They stop testing. They stop pushing. They begin adjusting language, tone, and expectations. This adjustment happens unconsciously. People rarely realize why they've changed how they treat you. They only know that something feels different. This is authority without conflict. You didn't confront. You didn't explain. You didn't demand respect. You simply stopped leaking emotional availability. Over time, this creates a reputation effect. People sense that pressure does not work on you, that emotional tactics bounce off, that reactions are rare and deliberate. This makes you expensive to manipulate, and manipulators conserve energy. They move toward easier targets. It also changes how neutral people interact with you. They become more deliberate. They listen more carefully. Interruptions decrease. Requests become cleaner. Conversations slow down. Not because you are cold, but because your calm sets the pace. This is integration. Silence is no longer something you do. It becomes something you are. Calm restraint becomes embodied authority. You are not withholding to punish. You are containing yourself because you no longer need to prove, defend, or react. Your internal stability becomes the reference point others orient around. This is the law beneath it all. Emotional access determines hierarchy. Those who can access your emotions can influence you. Those who cannot must adapt to you. Silence closes the door without slamming it. And once that door stays closed long enough, no one keeps knocking. In the final part, you'll see how this shift solidifies into an identity. Becoming someone who is not just resistant to manipulation, but fundamentally untestable. At some point, silence stops being a tactic and becomes an identity. This is the final shift. Not something you perform when needed, not something you try to do in difficult conversations, but a fundamental change in how your nervous system relates to pressure. You no longer react to regain control. You contain yourself, and control emerges naturally. The difference is subtle, but absolute. Reacting is movement. Containing is stillness. Reacting hands the situation outward. Containing keeps authority internal. Once this shift locks in, manipulation stops not because you've learned how to fight it, but because there is nothing left for manipulation to grab. This is what it means to be psychologically unmovable. Earlier, silence was a choice. You decided not to respond. You decided to pause. You decided not to explain. Now, silence becomes default, not because you're withholding, but because nothing inside you is being pulled hard enough to spill outward. This is containment. Containment does not mean emotional death. It means emotions exist, but they are no longer running the interaction. You feel irritation without showing it. You sense pressure without obeying it. You notice provocation without stepping into it. Internally, you are alive. Externally, you are steady. And steadiness terrifies manipulators. Manipulators depend on movement. They need emotional shifts to map you, a rise in tone, a defensive explanation, a rushed response, a flicker of guilt or anger. These are data points. When those signals disappear, the manipulator is left blind. This is why their behavior changes around you. First, they slow down. They test less aggressively. They soften their language or escalate awkwardly, unsure which approach works. Then, if silence persists, they do one of three things: retreat, respect, or expose themselves. Retreat happens when they realize there's no leverage. Respect happens when they sense hierarchy has flipped. Exposure happens when frustration causes them to overplay their hand. None of these outcomes require you to do anything. That's the power. Silence becomes authority, not because it intimidates, but because it cannot be negotiated with. Speech invites response. Silence invites adjustment. When you stop reacting, the burden of regulation moves to the other person. They must now manage their own emotions instead of using yours. This is why silence repels manipulators and attracts respect at the same time. Manipulators are repelled because there is no emotional access. They cannot rush you, guilt you, flatter you, or intimidate you into movement. Every tactic falls flat against stillness. Over time, they associate you with effort and uncertainty. Two things manipulators avoid. Respect, on the other hand, is drawn to silence because it signals self-command. People who respect strength are not looking for volume. They are looking for stability. They notice who doesn't flinch, who doesn't rush, who doesn't need to explain themselves to feel valid. Silence communicates that your internal world is ordered, and humans instinctively defer to order. This is where speech becomes a tool, not a reflex. You no longer speak to fill space. You no longer speak to relieve tension. You no longer speak to be understood or approved of. When you speak, it is deliberate, timed, minimal, clean. Words land heavier because they are rare. Your voice carries weight because it is not competing with your emotions. You don't argue. You don't justify. You don't narrate your inner world. You state, decide, or disengage. This changes how people approach you. Requests become clearer. Boundaries are assumed. Conversations slow down. Interruptions decrease. Challenges soften before they reach you. Not because you demanded any of this, but because your presence trained others to self-regulate. That is the deepest form of power. Let's lock the laws you've learned. Silence removes emotional feedback, and without feedback, manipulation collapses. Non-reaction reverses pressure, forcing others to regulate themselves. Unreadability removes leverage, making control impossible. Containment stabilizes hierarchy without confrontation. Authority emerges where emotional access ends. And finally, the law beneath all of it. The most dangerous person is the one you cannot emotionally move. Dangerous not because they harm, but because they cannot be steered. They are immune to urgency, immune to guilt, immune to intimidation, immune to flattery. They see pressure without absorbing it. They hear provocation without answering it. They feel emotion without broadcasting it. Their power is not loud, it is not visible. It is felt immediately. This is the dark psychology protocol identity. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer readable. You are no longer available for emotional negotiation. You are centered, contained, unmovable. And from that center, everything else adjusts. If this protocol showed you why silence revokes permission without a fight, tap like and hit subscribe. And comment this below. I do not give emotional access. Because when feedback disappears, manipulation starves, and hierarchy shifts quietly in your favor.